Coming up today on Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton, we'll be talking to Michael Lavrisha, a software developer who's taking a leave of absence from his normal job to help us out with the Chesterton Digital Library. That's all coming up soon on Uncommon Sense. You're listening to Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. Thanks for tuning in, and thank you so much, Michael, for being on the show with us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm here with Albert, my co-host, and we are going to talk about the Chesterton Digital Library.
Digital things are always fun. But
Exactly.
that's because I live in a digital world. Everything I do is digital and technology, so I maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Maybe Michael will say something and I'll be like, "Oh, that's not as fun as I thought."
Well, to give you an idea of our digital life right now, none of us live anywhere near each other. So we are blessed to be able to use technology to talk to today. Michael, why don't you go ahead and give us a little intro of yourself, and then maybe we can talk more about the Chesterton Digital Library project.
Okay. So, I'm Michael. I was a cradle Catholic and grew up in the faith. But then in college, I took a course on C.S. Lewis and kind of had a little bit of a reversion or a re-engagement with the faith, and then wanted to read more like Lewis, as so many people who come to Chesterton experience. And so I actually, and in preparation for this podcast, I actually had an exchange on social media way like 10 years ago now, where I had posted a quote from Chesterton. And I just said like, wow, this is fascinating. And it was on marriage and the family. And I actually got into a disagreement or an argument with a cousin of mine who I occasionally talk to about the quote. And I found myself like trying to look up additional Chesterton sayings about women or about the family. And this was like when and I was basically using Google, like their books service. And so looking at certain things and finding myself trying to like defend my position and, still maintain this familial relationship and stuff like that. And so I found myself in this position where it's like, wow, I wish I knew what Chesterton said on this thing, on this subject. So after that, kind of came further further back into the faith and just kind of danced around Chesterton for a while, read some little quotes here and there, and then eventually sat down to read his book on St. Francis, and then kind of read some more stuff along the way with him.
Wonderful. So now you're gifting us some time to work on this Chesterton Digital Library to help people like you who needed to find his quotes. Mm-hmm. That's great. Mm-hmm. Do you want to tell us some more about? I don't know that many of our listeners maybe know what the Chesterton Digital Library is. Would you mind introducing that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, the Chesterton Digital Library is the result of thousands of hours of volunteer work, not just by myself, but by many others. It's been the effort of people to go and find out what did Chesterton write and where did he write these things, or where did he give us a talk at, and how can we find the contents of that and represent it in a digital form. So people have been going to like libraries in England and going and looking up the microfilm getting a PDF copy of it, and then amassing this collection of these PDF images. And then volunteers have been typing up the content in those images in a digital form, so that we can search it and that kind of thing. And then that's kind of where I came in and started taking this content and putting it into a form that can be put online, so you can access it from your phone or your computer, and then you can also search for things and find things when you're in an argument with someone online.
I'm curious. I don't want to get too far away from the digital library that we're talking about right now, but I am interested in the fact that you have given 3 months of your time, because your employer generously gives you these 3 months to be on sabbatical to go help someone, and you, in all of your generosity, said, I'm going to help the Chesterton Society with this digital library. I'm sure you could have made a million different choices for these 3 months of sabbatical, but you chose to come and help us. And I would love to know, outside of your experience from 10 years ago when you were using Google Book Service to try and find it and it was more difficult, why make that decision? To this is a big commitment. I think it's a big choice. You have this option and you choose us. Why choose to come and do this work with the digital library?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, the company that I work for, VMware, gives, if you've been there for 5 years, they have a program where you can take 3 months to do something that's not your normal job. So you can do it within the company, or you can volunteer for a nonprofit. And I chose to do it with the Chesterton Society because, well, I've been volunteering for the past 4 or 5 years now, in the same capacity. And it kind of started, or my engagement with the society it was kind of started surreptitiously. I think that's the right word. We'll go with it. But,
yes, let's go. That's a great word.
Okay.
We're going to go with
yeah,
it.
It's a good word. So the surreptitious beginning happened. I was driving into the mountains, and I was listening to a certain podcast, Uncommon Sense, then hosted by Nancy Brown. And because I was looking for, I was reading Chesterton, and I found myself reading a paragraph of his and then rereading the same paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
And then finding that I still didn't get anything and then rereading the same paragraph. And so I was like, well, maybe there's there's a Chesterton for Dummies book out there or something. And so I looked up podcasts about Chesterton and found the Uncommon Sense podcast and was listening to an episode. And in it, Nancy said, hey, and we're looking for volunteers to build this library in the digital realm. And we have all of these Word documents that we need to put online. And it just kind of sounded like, oh, that sounds like a cool problem. It sounds like a very different problem than my normal day job. And so by day, I'm a web developer and develop web applications for like larger organizations and as a consultant. So it sounded like a nice, interesting problem with searching and how can you find certain quotations and stuff like that. So it was kind of like oh, this is interesting. And then I put my name into the hat and got a response and sort of started the volunteering from there.
Wonderful.
And so your time, because you said you've actually been doing this for 4 to 5 years, but now you're in a concentrated sort of 3-month sort of effort. Have you found that your time volunteering has actually been not just fruitful for what we've sort of reaped. We've reaped the benefits of your knowledge and your skills and your talents. But have you found yourself also to sort of be benefiting as you work through this project?
Yeah. I found that I can read Chesterton sometimes and not have to reread him sometimes. I've become a little more acquainted with his writing style, and so I try to read some of his articles because they're a little shorter and a little more compact. But I have found that it has been a benefit spiritually to engage with him on a more frequent basis, and just like on random subjects too. And I think the other thing too that was fascinating that I left out of my story initially was I had listened to another podcast from this other podcast, Art of Manliness, and they had a guest on who was talking about 10% time. So taking 10% of your time to do something different. So whether that's like start a business or, I don't know, go for walks or something. But and like with the idea of tithing sort of in the background. And so like I had listened to that and then heard Nancy's podcast. And so it was kind of this confluence of ideas that contributed to like, oh, maybe I could do this. And at the time I was only married, didn't have any kids yet, but now that's changed.
And as your life got less and less free, we especially appreciate the gift of time.
Uh-huh.
No, that's really great though, and I love how it's sort of like podcasts that brought you to this. You know, it's this grace that's sort of come through podcasts. But I would imagine too that working on the digital library, you kind of have a unique opportunity to be introduced to works of Chesterton that you might not otherwise see or encounter. That seems really, really cool.
Yeah. And I think the other sort of privilege to the work is getting access to all of this work that these volunteers have done, and sort of this it'd be like going and having private access to like a very special library with many leather-bound books, and like it's a very quiet place, like big chairs, probably a fireplace somewhere, but digitally, so
It's the
not as
metaverse
good
version.
as the real thing.
I love that image though. That's wonderful. And I don't know. I agree. I tend to feel like anytime I pick up Chesterton, and it doesn't really matter what time of day, there are usually children like screaming in the background, but I kind of go to that spot, and it's really fun to be able to hang out in that wonderful quiet library even when the world is in chaos around you.
Yeah, I think the other thing too that's super cool is like seeing kind of like having a good friend where you can bring your current interest du jour to them and say like, hey, check out this thing, blah 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 blah, it's super cool. And then like engaging with that person on that subject. Like this past year I took a course on architecture, not software architecture, but like building architecture. And it's in regards to this one architect, Christopher Alexander, who wrote many books, like Pattern Language was one of them. And he's kind of I don't know, maybe a fringe architect in terms of his beliefs and his methodology. Anyway, but he talks about a particular style or a particular approach to architecture that is very local, but also it is local in the sense that what is built is adapted to its circumstances or its context, and which is kind of aligns a lot with localism and the D word, distributivism, but it also, I was also curious on like, okay, what else has Chesterton had to say on architecture? And through the digital library, it turns out he gave a lecture to a group of I don't know if it was architects or like the equivalent of city planners in 20th century England, on building and his, you know, his sort of take on how buildings ought to be built. And it was fascinating to read. And I was just kind of like, thanks, Gil. You know,
It's funny, we've had a lot of people on this podcast already, and I feel like every one of them often says that they feel like Chesterton is a friend, a living friend, not someone who's gone, but someone that they can go to as a friend right now.
Yeah. And actually, one of the things that I think helped me to read Chesterton is there's a video of him on YouTube giving a lecture to some group. I think it was somewhere in Canada. But there was, and so you get to hear him actually speak with like how he like speaks with the pauses and like little giggles and digressions and stuff like that. And I actually found listening to him to be helpful in reading him, because the imagination has a little bit more to like work off of. So anyway, yeah, it's kind of like, how can you make him more incarnate digitally?
I love it.
I can only imagine, Michael, that with such sort of access now over these years to all of this Chesterton, that whether through just sheer uniqueness of an essay that he wrote, or the getting into the mind of Chesterton, that he has to sort of impact you in a certain way. And I'm just wondering, like, how has Chesterton impacted you, your personal life, your faith life, you know, after these years of sort of being inundated by him?
That's a great question. Well, I think it's certainly been a topic of conversation with my wife and in our marriage about sort of, hey, like with like the recent Supreme Court ruling happening and stuff like that. Bringing up some of Chesterton's arguments in that context and kind of playing with them in a real conversation with my wife, and like putting that hat on of like, okay, I'm going to take this position in an argument or something like that. So there's been a very, I don't know, pragmatic sort of effect that he's had on our lives, where it's like, okay, here are some arguments that I can adopt and try out, see what happens. But I also think he has a particular way of describing the world, or describing reality, that is just so refreshing and almost novel, but it's not really novel because it's the world, but maybe the description of it is somewhat unique, and it takes it refreshes you. And so I think the other thing that Chesterton has done for me in particular is just kind of put things into perspective, help identify what is important, what is kind of fluff or stuff that just comes up with the times, and stuff that is more distractions.
Nice. It kind of reminds me, as everything does, of a Chesterton quote. He says something like, you can see something 999 times, and then you see it for the thousandth time, and it's like you've seen it for the first time. And I always feel like it's so interesting that he said that, because so often when I read him, it's like he's helping me get to that thousandth time, whether I'm really there or not. It's like I see he writes it, and it's so unique in the way that he's presenting it that you sort of have to see whatever it is anew. It's refreshing is a really good way to put it.
The other thing you said, Michael, was talking about how it has sort of created these opportunities for conversation with your wife and given you points for how you want to, approach a particular argument. And I think, we could even relate to your example about reading about the presentation that he gave or the article that he wrote about architecture. And there's something about Chesterton where it seems like he has written about everything, about every topic. So you could be like, oh, well, Chesterton's not going to help me with this one. And he probably will. He actually probably will. If you could search and you could look through the breadth of his work, you would find something that he said. You could probably look about ice cream. You'd probably find something about ice cream or something really close to it. And you could say, yeah, all right, Chesterton helped me now with my view of the world and ice cream.
A few years ago, there was a quote that Dale found, and he actually talked about a Google. So it is all there. I forget what the context was. Ask Dale next time you see him. But the word Google appeared in the quote, and it was something like, it'll be as silly as a Google. And everyone was like, wow.
So I like that you are another example of how, Chesterton really is available for the masses, like wherever they're at, whatever they're interested in, that Chesterton can be that sort of one-stop shop for whatever it is you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the other thing too is making him available so that if you're not looking for something, you can still come across it.
Mm.
Does that make sense? Like
the thing you didn't know you needed.
Right. Yeah. How can you still find it? And one of the things I found is like even looking up some of Chesterton's more like salacious quotes, where it's like, what? He said that? Reading it in context maybe sometimes dismisses the whole thing, where it's just like, oh, okay. It's just, this one sentence, a part of this paragraph, which is in this chapter, which is in this book. And then other times it's kind of like, I need to look into that more. And then kind of like, pulling the string and seeing where it goes.
He's a challenger. I feel like you don't read Chesterton without being challenged.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Michael, before we run out of time, to kind of close up on the actual digital library, so where are we at? Like, what do we need? Where is the digital library as far as, getting it across the finish line so that it will be available to the masses? Like, where is it as far as its needs currently?
Great question. Well, we need proofreaders. So we need people who will look through the text copy of a work and look at the PDF of the like GK's weekly publication and compare and make sure that the digital copy is what the PDF has. So we need, and there are literally thousands of his works that need proofreading. So if anyone out there has a desire or feels the tug to sit down and read a lot of Chesterton for the good, please let us know. We can get you set up and operating pretty quickly. So that's one major need, and there's not a whole lot of, I don't know, prior experience needed.
Must be able to read.
Must be able to read.
So if you're interested in volunteering, as Michael was putting out the call send us an email at info@chesterton.org. That's info@chesterton.org, and tagline Digital Library Volunteer in the headline, and put yourself out there and join Michael on the journey of bringing this digital library to its completion, because it's massive. It is a huge, huge project, but it'll be to the greater good, I think, of everyone once it's done.
And you could, I mean, if you volunteer to be a proofreader, you get to read a lot of Chesterton that maybe hasn't been seen in a long time. So
it's like secret Chesterton.
Yeah, you get some secret Chesterton access. So that sounds pretty exciting.
And so we have the proofreader volunteers needed, and then we also have a need for additional programmers, UX designers. If you want to do some product management for Chesterton, figuring out what users need, that kind of stuff, I would greatly appreciate any other help or volunteers in that regard. If you're interested in some of the technical details, I'll just speak some nerd here really quick. We're using currently Gatsby as like a static site generation tool. And then we have Elasticsearch on the back end for searching these texts. It's a kind of a cool stack, and we're deployed on Netlify and so all these cool buzzwords. But it's kind of a cool stack to play with. It's super light and quick. A lot of my experience is in like Java and Spring World, which is just a whole different animal. So it's just kind of fun to do something different than your day job. And so if you have any desires to either learn those things or to play with that, please let us know.
If any of those buzzwords make sense to you, email us at info@chesterton.org and lay it out there that you understand Michael's lingo, and get on board to join him in what he is saying is a fun stack. So
it's either way, you can be sure you'd be joining a fun team, and you could be part of a really amazing project. I mean, Chesterton was one of the most prolific writers ever. I think that's indisputable. So putting everything that he ever wrote in a searchable form on the internet is an amazing labor of love. So thank you to everyone who has helped out. Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to all of you who will help out by emailing us at info@chesterton.org.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think maybe the other thing that I would just add as a closing remark is to echo the podcast that I heard, lo, these many years. Consider giving 10% of your time, either to this Chesterton effort or to something else, maybe perhaps a little more local to you. But it's borne a lot of fruit in my life and hopefully in the lives of others.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so very much, Michael, for joining us on Uncommon Sense, the official podcast of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you, Albert, for co-hosting. It's been really very interesting, and we all look forward to the release of the Chesterton Digital Library at some point in the future. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, Chesterton is always better with friends.